Welcome to In His Grip with Dr. Chuck F. Betters, produced by Mark Inc. Ministries. Each In His Grip message is designed to help turn your hearts toward Jesus and equip you to walk by faith. Let's join Dr. Betters in the sanctuary as he preaches the series, Treasures of Faith.
Please take a moment and take your Bibles and turn to the book of Genesis, Genesis chapter 19. God is looking for faithful people, people who will trust Him, people who will love Him, people who will believe Him, even when the lights go out. People who, although they may struggle, and although around them the pressures may become increasingly great, and almost as though everywhere we turn at every angle, something wrong happens, something new, something raw happens to us, God is still looking for people who are going to trust Him, who are going to believe that He is faithful to His promises and that He will not abandon His own. What have you griped about this past week? What have you moaned and groaned about this past week? Your Lexus needs new brakes? What have you moaned and groaned about? Do we have eyes that are open to the pain of the world around us? Do we see in the life of Abraham a movement of God and a counter-movement of Satan? Do you see it? You see that at the high points in Abraham's life, or just before those high points, Satan attacks. And no sooner does Abraham experience a great victory, Satan attacks. Do you think life was meant to be easy and simple? Do you ever wonder why Abraham is always picking up his bags and moving somewhere? And yet he is called the father of us all? In what sense is he the father of us all? At least in this sense, we are ambassadors. We don't live here. This is not our world. This is not our home. We're passing through. And our objective is to take as many people with us as possible. Yeah, it's going to be tough. There are going to be severe blows dealt to us. Some of those will be because we've made bad choices, like Abraham did. Some of them will be because Satan has launched a counterattack, and some of them will be simply because God is testing and purging our faith. We are going to the climax of Abraham's life. One of the greatest chapters in the Bible is Genesis chapter 22. We're getting to that. We won't be there this week, but we're getting there. When you come to Genesis chapter 22, you are dealing with one of the most pivotal chapters in all of Scripture. In fact, it is one of those passages, one of those chapters in the Bible upon which much of the Old Testament turns. It is the time when Abraham is going to be asked of God to release the most precious thing in the world to him, his own son Isaac. It is the supreme test that Abraham will face. But now along the way, he has had to learn some pretty valuable lessons. And it's intriguing to me when you come to Genesis 22, when God offers or tells him to offer Isaac, there's not a question asked. Something between Genesis 12 and Genesis 22, those 25 years, something happens in Abraham's heart. His faith is no longer defective. His faith is now pure. And he bows before his God and willingly comes to the place of offering his own son Isaac. How did he get there? How does he climb Mount Moriah? How does he ascend to that place? Well, through a lot of peaks and valleys, through a lot of tough times, through a lot of beating up, through a lot of chewing up and spitting out that's done by Satan himself. But the pilgrimage begins, and I say this almost fearfully, with the dismantling of a man of faith. God had to break him deeply in order that he might use him greatly. Is God breaking you this morning? You know, God no sooner gives Abraham the promise, I am going to make you a blessing to the nations. You are going to be the father of many nations. Through your seed, through your offspring, I am going to bless the nations of the earth. He no sooner says that than we ask this question, where and how does God begin to unfold his promise to Abraham that he will become the father of many nations? What's the first step God takes to prove to Abraham that he is going to make him the father of many nations? You got Genesis chapter 18 in your Bibles, please. Genesis chapter 18. beginning with verse 16. Remember how the angels, along with the Lord himself, came to announce to Abraham that Sarah would conceive the child? Remember how she laughed behind the tent? And God turned to her and said, Sarah, why did you laugh? And she lied to God and said, I didn't laugh. And God said to her, yes, you did. And you have that little confrontation between God and Sarah. We talked about this the last time we were together, that Sarah actually came to the point somewhere between that encounter with God and her conception of Isaac of true, genuine faith. Hebrews 11:11 tells us that. In fact, she came to the point of faith, and that as the result of that, God blessed her and conceived in her the child Isaac at 90 years of age. But now we see the scene shifting. God has made this promise. He has now dealt with Abraham's faith, perfecting it. He has dealt with Sarah's faith, perfecting it. And now we see that God is going to fulfill his promises to become, in and through Abraham, a blessing to the nations by doing something extraordinary. What's he going to do? One of the things he's going to do is destroy a city. In fact, he's going to destroy two of them. What an intriguing thing that must have been to Abraham. You're going to bless the nations of the earth through me, and the first step you're going to take is to burn them down. Look at verse 16. When the men got up to leave, they looked down towards Sodom, and Abraham walked along with them to see them on their way. Then the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all the nations on earth will be blessed through him, for I have chosen him so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. Verse 20, then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin is so grievous, that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. I don't even know how to begin to preach on that verse. I have no clue as to how to dissect that one. I think we're best left to mystery there. Somehow or another, our sins reach the heart and throne of God. Somehow or another, the outcry of the sins of men becomes so great that they reach the heart and throne of God. And in this particular case, he says, I'm going down to check it out for myself. I mean, major denominations today are looking at ways in which to solemnize gay marriages. It doesn't go away, does it? It's like a dripping faucet, this Chinese torture, just pounding away, and they just won't let it go. And they're not going to let it go because they honestly believe that they're right. Look at verse 22. The men turned away and went towards Sodom, but Abraham remained before the Lord, standing there. Then Abraham approached him and said, will you sleep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 people who are righteous in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will not the judge of all the earth do right? The Lord said, if I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake. You know, there are sins that are planned that never get executed. Say, what do you mean? We know the sins that we commit. You and I we both know the sins that we actually commit. What about the ones we don't commit, that we plot? Imagine the world in which we live today if all of the sins that were plotted or thought about were committed. Is it not the very presence of the church in the world today that holds back the wrath of God from destroying this whole world? Is it not because of the presence of those who have been made righteous that God does not incur his wrath and his judgment upon this whole world? How long will the cries of innocent babies, how long will the cries of innocent beaten and battered children go up to heaven, where God doesn't suddenly say, I've got to hear and see for myself whatever that mystery means, and come down to this earth and bring his wrath? Is it not because the church is present in this world? What if all you concocted in your mind, you executed? What if all the sins that you thought about committing, you committed? Is it not the restraining hand of God? Is it not the grace and the mercy of God? That is the reason we are not all consumed. Verse 26, if I find righteous, 50 righteous. Then verse 27, then Abraham spoke up again. Now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, though I am nothing but dust and ashes. Verse 28, what if the number of righteous is 5 less than 50? Will you destroy the whole city because of 5 people? If I find 45 there, he said, I will not destroy it. Once again he spoke to him, what if there are only 40? For the sake of 40, I will not do it. Then he said, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak. What if only 30 can be found there? He answered, I will not destroy it if I find 30 there. Abraham said, now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, what if only 20 can be found? He said, for the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Then he said, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak just one more time. What if only 10 can be found? For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. When the Lord had finished speaking with Abraham, he left, and Abraham returned home. You know, it's interesting to me that at the end of this conversation, God does not tell Abraham what he's going to do. He simply agrees that if I can find 10 righteous people. Now, a righteous person is one who has been made right in the sight of God, one who by faith has trusted in the provisions of God for their salvation. He said, if I find 10 of them, I will not destroy the city. Can you imagine the disappointment and the confusion in Abraham? Can you go one step further and imagine his concern for his nephew Lot and Lot's children and Lot's wife who were living in Sodom? Lot daily sat at the gates in Sodom and debated with the debased men of that city. In fact, I think the scriptures clearly teach us that Lot not only pitched his tent towards Sodom, that he became so intrigued by the lifestyle in Sodom, he moved his family there. But when he got there, he realized there's something inconsistent with what I believe about God and the way in which I'm raising my children and this city. Now the Bible tells us in 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 7 and 8, that God rescued Lot, a righteous man who was distressed. It tells us of Lot that he was distressed by the filthy lives of lawless men. For that righteous man living among them day after day was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw and heard. Now you got the spirit of Lot here? Here is a man who knew that the place in which he was raising his children was lawless and filthy and wretched and wrong. Yet he pitched his tent there. And it tore up his soul because he knew in his conscience that the lifestyle of the people around him and the lifestyle that was embraced by his own children was wrong and inconsistent with his belief in the one true living God. And so he would sit there at the gates of Sodom and debate it with these men. In fact, when we read of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 19:9, we have this scene where the men are standing ready to pound down the doors because they want to have the men, which they didn't know were really angels, that Lot was entertaining. They wanted them to come out. They wanted to drag them out of the house and have sex with them. And in that verse, chapter 19, verse 9, it says that they said, "Get out of our way," they replied. And they said, "This fellow," that's Lot, "came here as an alien, and now he wants to play the judge. We'll treat you worse than them." They kept bringing pressure on Lot and moved forward to break down the door. You got this scene? So what was gained, Lot? What did you gain by sacrificing your family on that altar? You thought you could reason with unreasonable men. You thought somehow you could compromise your own moral value system and pitch your tent not only towards Sodom, but live there without it having any effect on your children. Wrong. You guessed wrong. So the very men that he used to debate were now ready to break down his door and take his guests sexually and abuse them. His own children had embraced their sins. His daughters were engaged to sodomite men. and learned many of the vile practices of these perverse people. His wife was given to materialism, and she ended up experiencing the wrath of God and was turned into a pillar of salt. She was destroyed as a pillar of salt. Josephus, by the way, claims that he actually saw that pillar of salt. It was a crumbling crystalline rock, also seen by Clement of Rome and by Irenaeus. They say they actually saw the frozen image of Lot's wife, who was destroyed right there by the Dead Sea. In fact, archaeologists tell us that the Dead Sea is made up of basic asphalt that comes from this catastrophic event. It is clear, no matter how you look at it from this passage, that this event, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, is a type of the punishment that awaits all who reject God's provision for sin. It's a picture of hell. It's a picture of judgment to come. Look carefully at Genesis 19, beginning with verse 16. Genesis 19:16. The angels had already told Lot, get out of town. Get out of town. Pack up your family, get out of town, and don't look back. But he hesitated. Verse 16 of chapter 19. When he hesitated, the men grasped his hand and the hands of his wife and his 2 daughters and led them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them. As soon as they brought them out, one of them said, flee for your lives. Don't look back. Don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains or you will be swept away. The destruction of these cities was due to the fact that they had become so debased. They had reached this point of no return. That is, their sin was a sin unto death. They had become reprobate, and when one becomes reprobate, God has no other choice but to destroy them. It is no coincidence, by the way, that when the reprobate mind is described in Romans chapter 1, it is the sin of sodomy that is the characteristic of reprobation. We have mainline denomination committees in, quote, Christian churches recommending the solemnizing service of committal for homosexuals. Can there be any greater apostasy than that? But back to chapter 18 and verse 16, there's a very solemn verse. When the men got up to leave, 18:16, when they got up to leave, they looked down towards Sodom, and Abraham walked along with them to see them on their way. Can you imagine being with these angels who had been commissioned to carry out the wrath of God and his judgment upon the earth? I'm intrigued by those words. They looked down towards Sodom. I can't imagine what angel eyes must look like when they're about to execute the judgments that they have been commissioned to execute. If you don't believe that, you haven't read the book of Revelation, where the agents of destruction and the agents of the wrath of God are the angels. God commissions angels. Go and destroy a third of this. Go and burn up that, and go and burn up this, and bring this plague, and bring that plague. And the seals are opened one by one. It's the picture of a 7-sealed book. A scroll wrapped up 7 different times and sealed 7 different ways. And each of the seals is broken open, and the angels are commissioned to go and carry out the judgment. That verse just says they turned and they looked down towards Sodom. The judgment had already been made. There was no room for acquittal. There was no plea bargaining. There was nothing left that the people of Sodom could say. Once God turns his head and fixes his eyes and pronounces the judgment, it is irrevocable. What did their faces look like when they looked down towards Sodom? It is a certainty, friends, that God will look down upon the sins of man, and he will carry out what he has promised to carry out. We have been warned. So much so, we have an entire book of warnings and a specific description of how God is going to do what he has said he's going to do. So what does Abraham do? He appeals to the character of God. He appeals on the basis of God's character. He stands in front of God and he says, on the basis of your justice, You are a just God. You do all things well. You are a holy God. There can be no wrong in you. On the basis of justice alone, if I can find 50, if there are 50 righteous there, will you spare the city? It goes all the way down to 10. There's a wonderful question in chapter 18 and verse 23. It's a good question. It should spur some good theological thought for you. Abraham approached him and said, 18:23, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? That's a good question, isn't it? Will God sweep away the righteous with the wicked? You know what the answer to that question is? No. That's why Christ came. That's why Jesus came to die on a cross. So that the wickedness on my head could be transferred to his head, and the righteousness in him could be imputed to me. So that when the wrath of God is experienced by this world, I will miss it. I will pass by it. I am not under the curse and the wrath of God. That wrath has been incurred by his Son. He took that hell. He took that judgment. I've been set free. And so when the judgment comes, will the righteous be swept away with the wicked? No. This is a profound question. It has eternal implications for each one of us sitting here today. Will God allow his elect people to experience his wrath? No. The wrath of God has already been experienced by Christ. He died on the cross. He paid the sin debt. He died and rose again. He is the one who experienced the full weight of God's wrath on his head for my sins. Certainly the salvation of Lot and his daughters was not on the basis of their foreseen faith or their inherent goodness. I already showed you the picture of how the angels kind of take them by the hand and push them out the door because God was merciful. They're standing there looking around at their TVs and VCRs. God promised protection. God promised his presence. God said, I'm going to make of you a great nation, Abraham. All the nations of the earth will be blessed. And Abraham stands there in the gap and intercedes. Lord, please don't destroy these cities. Please don't take these cities down. If we can find just 5, 10 righteous people, Lord, will you spare the cities? They couldn't even find 10. And they only found Lot, his wife, and their 2 daughters. The wife was killed when she looked back. The 2 daughters committed incest against their father. What does that tell you? Then we come to Genesis chapter 20. Remember, Abraham is observing all this. He's ascending Mount Moriah. He's coming to the point of dismantling his own perverted faith and coming to the point of absolute obedience to God. How prone are we to go back to our old life when God turns up the heat? He no sooner witnesses God's majesty and the holiness of God with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah than once again Abraham is faced with the premise of whether or not he will trust God to make provision for him and for his family and carry out those promises. He leaves Mamre. The Bible tells us in Genesis 20, he leaves Mamre. Now, scholars differ as to why he left. He finds himself in the land of the Philistines in Gerar, and scholars differ as to why did he pack up his bags and leave. Well, there's a few theories out there. One of the theories, which I think is reasonable, is that the area in which he was raising his cattle had been destroyed. There was no grazing because the earth had been parched. And when he woke up in the morning, the only thing he could smell was rotten eggs burning. The stench of the smell and the smoke of the destruction of these cities must have been unbearably bad. Maybe, as one scholar says, the reason he left Mamre was because his reputation had been shattered in the eyes of those around him because of what his nephew Lot's daughters had done ancestrally against their father. You say, what do you mean? I'll put it in terms you'll understand. Is this how Christians act? If it is, I don't want to be a part of it. And maybe the reputation of Abraham's faith was so shattered by what had happened with his nephew Lot and his 2 daughters that Abraham had no other recourse but to leave town. We're not told why he left. But we do know this, that what used to be green, lush, and pleasant to the eyes, the land that motivated Lot's lustful claim of the land from Abraham, is now desolate, burned up, smelly, and under the curse of God. Maybe he needed to find some better grazing. When he arrives in the Negev at Gerar with his pregnant wife, what does this man of faith do? What does this giant in the Hall of Fame do? What's the first thing he does when he arrives in the land of the Philistines? He immediately, once again, prostitutes his wife out of fear that the king will kill him in order to have Sarah. Now, I got to tell you something. Sarah is 90 years old and pregnant. She is 90 years old and pregnant. Now, we read these stories about her legendary beauty. And I'm not going to minimize what the king of the Philistines was going to do. He was going to have her sexually. The Bible's clear about that. Her beauty must have been remarkable and stunning, that at the age of 90 and pregnant, he would want her. But he did. Now, some scholars have said, well, it was for political reasons. He wanted to align himself with Abraham. And I don't buy that theory because of what happens next when God intervenes. I believe that her beauty was so exceptional that even at 90, she was still a desirable woman to have in a king's harem.
Thank you for listening. For the complete sermon, please visit markinc.org and click In His Grip. Join Dr. Chuck F. Betters in the sanctuary from Monday to Thursday on the In His Grip podcast.